At 78, I've learned an uncomfortable truth. If I had left my marriage during the years I wanted to, people would have understood. They would have said I tried. They would have said some things just aren't meant to last. And, honestly, they wouldn't have been wrong. There were years when staying felt heavier than leaving. Years when coming home felt like work. Years when silence followed us from room to room and neither of us knew how to break it. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling it the way it was. This isn't a story about how we stayed in love. It's about how close we came to walking away more than once. And why, in moments I still don't fully understand, we didn't. If you're looking for a comforting story about marriage, this probably isn't it. I should probably say this before you read too much into what I'm about to tell you. I've never been a romantic person. I don't. Not because I didn't feel it, I just didn't know what to do with the words. I don't believe in soulmates. I never believed there was one person out there made just for me. I believed in showing up, paying bills, keeping promises, that sort of thing. When we got married, I thought love was something you felt at the beginning, and then, if you were responsible enough, it would somehow carry itself. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it then. If you're looking for a love story, the kind where people always understand each other, always communicate, always choose each other for the right reasons, this will disappoint you. Most of the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't brave. I wasn't emotionally fluent. I just stayed. And sometimes staying had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with not knowing how to leave without destroying everything we'd built. These days, our mornings are quiet. Not the peaceful kind people talk about, just quiet. She wakes up before I do. I hear the kettle before I open my eyes. It's the same sound every morning, and somehow I'd miss it if it stopped. She pours the coffee halfway, adds hot water, then coffee again. I once asked why she does it that way. She said it tastes better. That was the end of the conversation. I leave my keys on the hook by the door, the second hook from the left. She moves them sometimes, just a little, because she says the clinking bothers her at night. I pretend it doesn't matter. It does, but not enough to say anything. We don't talk much before breakfast. Not because we're upset, we just don't need to. We read different sections of the paper. Occasionally, she slides an article toward me without looking up. I know that means she thinks I should read it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. She never asks. There's a rhythm to it, a way of moving around each other without bumping into old arguments. I know when to speak and when not to. She knows when to let things go. We didn't learn that from books or counseling. We learned it by getting it wrong for years. I used to think this was what happiness looked like: comfort, predictability, no surprises. It took me a long time to realize how thin that line is, how close comfort can sit to distance, how easily routine can turn into something hollow if you stop paying attention. At the time, I didn't see it as a warning. I saw it as stability. I didn't know how much we were already drifting quietly, politely, right past each other. There were years when we barely touched each other. I don't just mean physically. That was part of it, sure. But what really disappeared was the sense that we were on the same side. We slept in the same bed and faced opposite directions. At first it was just a habit, then it became a message. Some nights I'd notice it and think about turning toward her. Most nights I didn't. We didn't fight much. People always think that's a good sign. It isn't. Not always. Fighting means someone still cares enough to push back. What we had was quieter than that. We spoke about groceries, schedules, appointments. We stopped talking about anything that might turn into something heavier. There were long stretches when it felt like we were just sharing a house, two adults doing what needed to be done. No drama, no warmth either. I remember one night lying there, staring at the ceiling, thinking how strange it was that someone could be right next to you and feel so far away. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of trying to read her, tired of guessing what she needed, tired of feeling like whatever I said would be wrong, or late, or not enough. There were moments I thought about leaving, not during big arguments, during small, ordinary days. Standing in the kitchen while she washed dishes, sitting in the car after work, engine off, not ready to go inside. I told myself, this is just how long marriages are, that the excitement fades, that companionship replaces it. But looking back now, that wasn't companionship, it was avoidance. Love didn't disappear, respect did. I didn't respect her need to be heard. She didn't respect my way of shutting down. And instead of talking about it, we both learned how to live around it. She stopped asking me questions. I didn't notice at first. Then I noticed and told myself it didn't matter. She stopped telling me about small disappointments at work, stopped pointing out things that bothered her. That should have scared me. It didn't. I thought we'd finally reached a place where things were calm. What I didn't understand then is that calm can be a warning sign, because when someone stops expecting anything from you, they're already letting go, quietly, without making a scene. There were months when we went through the motions perfectly. Bills paid, family events attended, holidays handled. From the outside, we looked fine. Solid, even. People would say how lucky we were, how rare it was to see a couple still together after all those years. I would nod and agree. It was easier than explaining the truth. The truth was, I didn't know how to reach her anymore, and I wasn't sure she wanted me to. We weren't cruel to each other. That almost made it worse. Cruelty would have given us something to react to. Instead, we became careful, polite, considerate. Two people trying not to make things worse by not making them better either. I don't think either of us planned to give up. It happened slowly. So slowly that by the time I realized how far apart we'd drifted, I wasn't sure how to close the distance without making things awkward, or painful, or final. And there were days, honest days, when leaving felt like the cleanest option. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had started to hurt more than not trying at all. The turning point didn't come with a big conversation. There was no moment where we sat down and said everything we'd been holding in for years. No promises, no fresh start. If I'm honest, I think we were both too tired for that by then. It happened on an ordinary night. I don't even remember the date. We were sitting at the kitchen table, not talking, just going through the usual end-of-day motions. I was thinking about how heavy everything felt, how much effort it took just to keep things from getting worse. And for the first time, I thought clearly about what leaving would actually mean. Not the fantasy version, the real one. Packing things, explaining myself to family, dividing a life that had been built over decades, starting conversations I didn't want to have, learning how to be alone in a way I hadn't been in years. And that's when it landed on me, quietly. Leaving would require just as much effort as staying. Different effort, but effort all the same. I had spent so much time thinking of staying as the hard choice and leaving as the escape. That night, I realized neither one was easy. Neither one came without cost. I also realized something else, something I wasn't proud of. I wasn't staying because I felt deeply in love. I wasn't staying because I believed things would magically get better. I was staying because underneath everything, the distance, the silence, the fatigue, I still cared what happened to her. And that surprised me. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel noble. It just felt honest. I stopped waiting for the feeling to come back before doing anything. I didn't suddenly become more expressive or emotionally skilled. I just made smaller choices. staying in the room instead of leaving it, listening without correcting, letting things go that I would have pushed back on before. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inspiring. It was practical. And in a strange way, that practicality saved us. Because once I stopped expecting marriage to feel a certain way, I could finally deal with it the way it actually was. Here's the truth I wish someone had told me earlier, though I'm not sure I would have listened. A long marriage isn't built on love. It's built on what you do on the days you don't feel it. That took me a long time to understand. I spent years thinking something was wrong with us because the feeling wasn't always there. Because some mornings I woke up and felt nothing in particular, no warmth, no resentment either, just the weight of another ordinary day. I thought love was supposed to carry you through those moments, that if it didn't, it meant the marriage was failing. What I see now is that love isn't the engine, it's the byproduct. What actually holds things together are the choices that don't feel meaningful at the time, staying in the conversation when it would be easier to shut down, doing the small, unremarkable things without waiting to feel inspired, choosing not to turn every disagreement into a verdict on the relationship. None of that feels romantic. It doesn't look good in stories, and it doesn't give you that rush people talk about. But it gives you continuity. And over decades, continuity starts to matter more than intensity. I didn't stay because I always felt love. I stayed because on the days I didn't, I still showed up. That's not a message people like, but it's the only honest one I have. Time changes the rules, whether you're ready for it or not. Somewhere along the way, romance stopped being the center of things. Not all at once. It just stepped aside. And responsibility moved in without asking permission. There are doctor appointments now, not serious ones, at least not yet. Just enough to remind you that the body doesn't do what it used to. Blood pressure, cholesterol, knees that ache for no clear reason. A list of medications that grows quietly, one refill at a time. She keeps them in a small plastic organizer, labeled by day. I used to tease her about it. Now I rely on it. I drive. She handles the paperwork. She always did, even when we were younger. I sit in the waiting room and watch couples like us. Some talk, some don't. You can tell who's been together a long time. There's a certain way they sit, close, but not touching, like they don't need to prove anything anymore. At home, I help her with buttons when her fingers are stiff. She reminds me which pills I've already taken. We don't make a big deal out of it. Making a big deal would only make it harder. This isn't the marriage we imagined when we were younger. There are no dramatic gestures here. No late night conversations about the future. The future feels closer now, smaller. But there's something steady about this phase. A quiet understanding that someone is paying attention. That if one of us forgets, the other will remember. If one of us stumbles, the other will slow down. At some point, romance steps aside and responsibility moves in. I didn't realize how much that mattered until it was there, until care replaced passion, until showing up meant something very different than it used to. And somehow, it still counted. The surgery wasn't supposed to be serious. That's what they told us. Anyway, routine procedure, low risk. The kind of thing people our age go through all the time. We nodded, asked a few questions, signed the forms. Neither of us said what we were really thinking. Hospitals have a way of stripping things down. You sit there with nothing to do but wait, and suddenly your mind won't stay where you want it. I watched people walk past me in that hallway, carrying coffee, charts, conversations that had nothing to do with us. Time felt uneven, too fast and too slow at the same time. They took her in early. She squeezed my hand once before they wheeled her away. Not dramatic, just enough to say, "I'm here, don't go anywhere." I sat in that waiting room longer than I expected. I kept checking the clock, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. I thought about calling someone, then decided not to. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want reassurance. What surprised me was what I wasn't afraid of. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I'd been alone before. Even in that marriage, there were long stretches that felt like that. What scared me was something smaller, quieter. I was afraid of never hearing her voice again. Not during important moments, during ordinary ones. The way she says my name when she wants my attention but doesn't want to interrupt. The sound she makes when she's thinking. The sigh she lets out when she sits down after a long day. Those things came back to me sitting there, one after another, not memories I'd ever thought to hold on to, just pieces of a life that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing them. I realized then how much of our connection lived in those unnoticed spaces, the routines, the sounds, the presence. If she didn't come back from that room, those things would disappear, and no one else would ever do them the same way. That's when it hit me. I hadn't stayed all these years because I was afraid of being alone. I stayed because, somewhere along the way, her existence had woven itself into mine so completely that losing her felt like losing part of the world itself. Not the world in a poetic sense, the real one, the one I lived in every day. When the doctor finally came out, I stood up before he said anything. I could tell by his face. It had gone well. He explained details I barely heard. All I could think about was seeing her again. When they brought me in, she was still groggy. She opened her eyes halfway and said my name, slightly slurred. It wasn't a big moment. No tears, no speeches. But in that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time in a long while. This wasn't about love the way people talk about it. This was about presence, about familiarity, about a voice that anchored you to your own life. And the thought of never hearing it again, that was unbearable. Marriage didn't teach me how to be happy. I know that's not what people expect to hear, but it's the truth. What it taught me was something quieter and honestly, harder. It taught me how to live with another person without trying to win. For a long time, I thought being right mattered. I thought if I could explain myself clearly enough, defend my point well enough, things would fall into place. Most of the arguments we had weren't about anything important. They were about tone, timing, feeling dismissed, feeling unseen. Winning those arguments never kept us together. Listening did. And I wasn't very good at that. Not at first. I listened to respond, not to understand. I listened for openings, not for meaning. It took years, decades to realize that most of what she wanted wasn't solutions. It was acknowledgement. I also learned how much damage comes from small things left unattended. Not betrayals, not dramatic mistakes. Just moments where you choose convenience over care, silence over effort, being comfortable over being present. The strange thing is, the stuff I thought mattered when we were younger barely registers now. The money arguments, the schedules, who did what more often. None of that feels important when time starts shrinking. What matters now are the things I used to dismiss. Sitting in the same room, not talking, but not needing to leave. Knowing when to give space and when to stay put. Remembering how someone takes their coffee. Not because it's cute, but because it means you're paying attention. Marriage taught me that love isn't proven in grand moments. It's revealed in patterns, in what you consistently do when no one's watching, in how you show up when you're tired, distracted, or unsure. I used to think a good life was one without friction. Now I know better. A meaningful life isn't smooth, it's steady. And if I'm honest, most of what I learned about life, I learned by getting it wrong first and staying long enough to see what actually mattered. I don't have advice to give you. I've never been good at that. But there are a couple of questions I find myself thinking about more often these days, especially when the house is quiet. Who is the one person you would truly regret losing? Not today, not while everything still feels manageable, but at the very end, when there's no time left to fix things. And when you think about the tensions in your life, the arguments you replay in your head, ask yourself this honestly. Are you fighting to be right? Or are you fighting to stay connected? Those two things feel similar when you're in the middle of them. They aren't. I didn't understand that until much later than I should have. And I wonder sometimes how many people are standing right where I once stood, thinking there will be time to sort it out later. We didn't stay married because we were happy every year. There were years that felt thin, years that dragged, years I wouldn't want to repeat. If I'm honest, there were moments when staying felt less like a choice and more like inertia. Like we just kept going because stopping would have been harder to explain. But that's not the whole story. What kept us together wasn't romance. It wasn't passion. It wasn't even love in the way people like to talk about it. It was the willingness to keep moving forward together, even when it wasn't pretty. Even when neither of us felt particularly generous or understood. We grew old side by side, not because it was always good, but because we allowed it to change. We allowed ourselves to change, to soften in places we used to be rigid, to let go of versions of ourselves that no longer fit. This marriage didn't give me a perfect life. It gave me a real one. And at this age, real feels more valuable than beautiful. If there's anything redeeming in the years we spent together, it's this. We didn't quit when the story stopped being flattering. We stayed long enough to see what remained after the illusions fell away. And somehow, quietly, that turned out to be enough.